Hi friends, Krista here. Thanks for stopping by Books and Jams. Today I'm going to be telling you about the huge reading month that I had in the month of August. I can't believe that I completed 17 books this month. It has been quite a long time since I've had such a huge amount of books read. The last few months have been more like 6, 7, 4. So to have 17 is massive. There were 2 readathons during the month of August that I participated in and felt very pleased and impressed with the amount of reading that I did. At the beginning of August, we had Booktubeathon, and the first 2 days of the readathon were in July, so I didn't count the first book I read. I did read these 6 books during the Booktubeathon. I will leave a link for my actual Booktubeathon wrap-up so that you can see my thoughts on all of these books, but let me just tell you what the 6 books I read during the August part of the Booktubeathon are. Since You've Been Gone by Morgan Matson, The Lost Castle by Christy Cambron, First and Then by Emma Mills, Where the Red Fern Grows by Wilson Rawls, I Let You Go by Claire McIntosh, and this was my Goodreads read-along group for the month, so thanks to all of you who joined in for this discussion. And finally, Far From the Tree by Robin Benway. I was pleased with most of those reads. There was a couple that were not quite what I was expecting, but they were fun and quick, and I did complete 7 books in 7 days during the Booktubeathon, so I call that a win. Then later in August, there was the Book Swapathon, which is a readathon that I hosted. I will again put a link in the description to the wrap up for the Book Swapathon because I'm not going to talk about these books either. But I did read 4 books that week, these 3 plus an audiobook. And those are Much Ado About Nothing by William Shakespeare, The Simple Faith of Mr. Rogers by that person. Sorry, I still can't remember the name. Every Note Played by Lisa Genova, and Faithful by Alice Hoffman. Outside of those 2 readathons, I read 7 more books in the other 2 weeks of August. So that's a huge reading month. I've gone back to waiting until the end of the month to do my wrap up, and I don't like it. So hopefully in September, I'll go back to a vlog style wrap up where I kind of talk about the books right after I read them, so you get my thoughts a little more freshly, a little more accurately as to what I feel when I first finish the book. Because like this book, Letters to the Lost by Bridget Kemmerer, I read this one way at the beginning of August, and I have a hard time even now remembering much about it because I read so many books this month. But I do know that this book made me cry. It's a YA, and it's about this girl who visits the grave of her mother who's recently passed and leaves her notes. Then there's a boy who is helping to take care of the grounds of the cemetery for his community service, and he finds these notes and begins writing back to her. And so this begins this communication between these 2 people. I don't want to say too much about it to give it away, but I did really love this book very much. So many people told me that they loved it, and I knew that it was going to be one that was going to rip my heart out a little bit. Both of the characters are dealing with a lot of different things. From the girl's point of view, losing a parent sucks big time, and learning how to go through life without that influence in your life anymore is really difficult. And then on the guy's perspective, being somebody different than everybody thinks you are, do you give in to those expectations or try to change people's minds about who you are? Yeah, they both are dealing with different things, and I loved how it was written. I loved the letters that they wrote back and forth. I thought the romance was sweet, and although it may have been a bit predictable, I still really enjoyed it. So yay for this one. And then I read another Frederick Bachman book. I had previously only read A Man Called Uwe and loved it, and have been gathering all the other ones whenever I find them secondhand. And finally this month picked up another one, and that is My Grandmother Asked Me to Tell You She's Sorry by Frederick Bachman, obviously. This was such a fun book. In this book, we have this little girl and her grandmother, and a big part of the book are these fairy tale-esque stories that the grandmother has created. She's created this whole land, and it has different worlds within it, and different people and characters throughout the world. It's super consistent all the way through. We begin to learn that these stories have ties to reality. One of the things that I love the most so far about the 2 Bachman books that I've read are his characters, because they're so quirky and unique and yet lovable, flawed, and so just fun to read. In this book, we have Elsa, who is the 7-year-old granddaughter, who's super smart for her age and wise beyond her years. And then we have this grandmother who's a little bit crazy, very headstrong, and has lived through a lot of stuff. As the book goes on, you get more and more of her story and Obviously, there are these letters that she writes for almost like a scavenger hunt that she sends Elsa on. In this book, Elsa and her mom, along with the grandmother, all live in this building that has a bunch of different apartments within the building. And so we get to meet other people within this building as well, and they're just as quirky and unique and deep as Elsa and her grandmother as well. I just love the characters so much in his books. He makes me laugh, he makes me cry. Uwe did the same thing. So I'm really looking forward to reading more from Frederick Bachman. And in September, I'm finally getting around to Beartown. Yay! I can't wait. I would definitely recommend picking up Frederick Bachman if you haven't yet done so. Another book that kind of took me by surprise is The Edge of Lost by Christina McMorris. I remember talking about this book as being about a little girl on Alcatraz who goes missing. And while that is a part of the story, it is not the main part of the story. In this book, we really follow an Irishman named Shan. We start with him when he's young, living in Ireland, and the situation that happens that brings him to America, and then his life in America. A bit of a hard life, and then eventually these two storylines of this girl going missing on Alcatraz and Shan's storyline do eventually intermingle. Yeah, I just wasn't prepared to be reading about Shan and Ireland at all, so I clearly didn't read the description well enough. It threw me for a loop at the beginning, so it took me a little bit to get into it. However, I loved Shan. I just thought he was one of the good guys and had some rough situations in life to deal with, and I was really drawn into his story once I got past my hang up of not really knowing what the book was about. Yeah, I really enjoyed hearing his story, getting to know him. It's very heartfelt. I really like Christina McMorris's writing. I really am looking forward to reading more from her because I did really enjoy this book very much. This was supposed to be a buddy read with Roger, one of my subscribers, but I don't think he could get past the fact that it was quite different than what we were expecting, so he ended up DNFing it. But I thought it was really good in the long run. But I love historical fiction, so I really enjoyed learning about Irish immigrants in New York and what that was like for little Shan, and I liked it very much. The next book that I finished in August was Scythe by Neil Shusterman. I loved this book. I read this with Jess from Jess McGlynn, and we both really enjoyed it. This is about almost like a dystopian, utopian future where pain and death and illness and disease are no longer a problem for the world. So therefore, there are this group of scythes all over the world whose job it is to help with population control by gleaning people, ultimately killing them. The interesting thing about this book is that it really made me think about morality and what's right and wrong, and ultimately killing people is wrong, right? But in this book, this is just the way of things, and so different scythes have different methods and reasons for doing their gleanings, and it was interesting to compare them to one another and feel like some were on higher moral ground than others. It was very interesting, my thought process throughout reading this book. There are two scythe apprentices that we meet in this book, Citra and Rowan, and we kind of follow their progress and process into potentially becoming scythes themselves. So I am very interested in reading the sequel, Thunderhead, which is right behind me. I did get it from the library and will be reading that for my sequel September. This was a lot of fun. It was a really, really good read. It lived up to the hype for me. I love when books do that. I always get nervous about books that are super hyped, but this one lived up to the hype for me. One that did not live up to the hype for me is One True Loves by Taylor Jenkins Reid. And I don't know if this is because it's contemporary and the main focus is romance that I didn't like it. I don't know. Or because it was predictable. I don't know. In this book, we have a woman named Emma who, when she's quite young, marries her high school sweetheart. They kind of both have jobs where they get to travel and do what they love. But on one of his jobs, his helicopter goes down and he goes missing. The body is never found. She, after quite a long time, has to assume that he is dead. She reconnects with an old friend from high school and they begin a relationship. This is quite a long time later, so it's not a big deal. However, now that she's in this relationship with Sam, he is the new love of her life. They get engaged and boom, her first husband returns on the scene. Apparently he didn't die after all. What is she gonna do? Yeah, it was very predictable. It was a quick, easy read, but I didn't particularly love it nearly as much as everybody else did. That's all I have to say about that one. I have two library books here, which you've most recently seen on my library book haul, and the first is Ghosted by Rosie Walsh. This was a fun book. It surprised me. I remember talking about this on my Insta stories because after I started this about 20 pages in, it was getting late one night and I wanted to keep reading, but I couldn't, and I was super tempted to peek ahead to find out what happens. In this book, we follow Sarah. Near the beginning, we find out about her week-long whirlwind romance with a fella named Eddie. It doesn't go too in depth at the beginning, but we learn that this week wasn't just a fling for either of them. Their lives, Sarah's life anyway, has been deeply changed. However, at the end of this week, Sarah has reached out to Eddie multiple times and he has ghosted her, hence the title. So what happened? We also learned that there's some situation from her past that has affected her adulthood in really intense ways. And you don't really learn about that right at the beginning either. So that was interesting to kind of find out and wonder about what is going on here. I loved trying to figure out what happened throughout this book. I loved that there were some things that took me by surprise. I'm not very good at predicting outcomes anyways, so it's not that hard to take me by surprise, but it really did. I thought this was just a lot of fun. I was really pleased that I took the time to read it. And finally, the book that I just finished like a half an hour ago that I absolutely loved, and that is Tangerine by Christine Mangan. This, I would say, is sort of a historical mystery, a little bit thrillery. This book was so atmospheric. The majority of the book takes place in Morocco, in Tangier. It made me reminisce about Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier because it has that same kind of dark, atmospheric feeling. The tension was so real. I don't know the word. It was so good. It did get a little dark. It got a little almost creepy. I wouldn't really say creepy. For those who read creepy books, you're probably like, this is not creepy at all. But for me, it had a level of creepiness that was fun. It didn't go too far. We get to know Alice and her husband John, and Alice is very tentative and afraid, borderline agoraphobic, where she doesn't want to leave the house at all. And we start to learn about why, things that have happened in her past that have caused her to have such great anxiety. And then one day her old college roommate Lucy shows up in Tangier and stays with them. I suspected everybody and I couldn't figure out who is good here, who is bad, who's lying, who's telling the truth, what's really going on. I had fun reading this book. It's not a very long book. I think just about 300 pages. At one point, something happens to the husband and you just don't really know at first what happened. And yeah, the ending was horrifying. I don't want to talk about the ending. I just really enjoyed this book and would definitely recommend picking this one up if you like historical books. There's not too much historical, I guess. What is happening at the same time of the story of Alice and John and Lucy, Tangier is fighting for its independence. So there's this element of tension in the whole town and in Morocco at the time. The heat feels so oppressive. I mean, it's constantly talking about the heat and there's no breeze and their clothes are sticking to them. And so you feel the oppressiveness of this heat. There's nothing light and fluffy about this book at all. So it might be good in these dog days of summer. It was perfect for me to read this today and yesterday because it's super hot here in Virginia this week and I could feel that oppressive heat as I'm reading this. Actually, last night it was constant thunder. I don't think the storm actually hit right here, but we had these long bursts of thunder, which just added to the kind of creepiness as I was reading. It was definitely a really fun reading experience, and I would recommend picking this book up if you enjoy that kind of mystery, thrillery, psychological situation. Yeah, this was a really fun one. Here are the 7 books that I did not read during a readathon in August. I would love to hear your thoughts on these or any of the ones I read during the readathon in the comments down below. You know I love chatting with you down there, and as always, give this video a big thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll be chatting with you in another video very soon. Bye!